Even if you're not a fan of racing games, I'm sure you know what Need for Speed is. And no, it's not only a quote from Top Gun,
I feel the need for speed,
but actually a very popular series that already had 25 main installments. The last one was released in 2022, and judging by the recent news, EA might actually be putting the series on ice, or maybe even quietly killing it off completely. Let's have a look through all we actually know, some speculations, and what it means for the future of Need for Speed. Let's start with a bit of history. While the series started in 1994 and was developed by EA Canada, the peak era for the series started in the early 2000s with the release of Underground, then Underground 2 that went into the direction of open world, and then there was Most Wanted that for many people to this day is the best game within the series. Since then there were some hits and misses, I'd say more often misses actually, and the most recent game in the series, Need for Speed Unbound, even though it started with pretty solid scores, didn't really seem to connect with players in the long run. If you look at the game even today, comparing people playing it on Steam with the earlier game, NFS Heat, over twice as many players still play it today, and the all-time peak speaks volumes as well, though it was on a really good sale at some point. Scores support that as well. All-time for Unbound is 61%, and for Heat that's 84%. Unbound, as the latest game in the series, cannot be considered a success, and this will be important going forward. Months have passed since release, the devs tried to do something with new updates, sometimes playing on nostalgia, just like in last November when the update called Lockdown was introduced, with cars inspired by the classics from the blacklist from Most Wanted. But even then, the communication about the game pointed to the fact that this is the end of the road for Unbound. First of all, there was the Ultimate Collection that suggested that this is a game with its complete post-launch premium content. Secondly, after Volume 9, it was explicitly said that this is the end of Kaizen, which was the code name for the second year of updates based on player feedback. And yeah, it was said that the team that kept updating Unbound is joining their colleagues at Criterion, working on the future of Battlefield.
Huh?
Yes, Battlefield. First, I have to mention that in July 2023, there was a job offer saying that Criterion Games, as a studio that is now challenging the conventions of the racing genre to take the Need for Speed franchise to the next level, is looking for a world artist who will focus on the open world in their project. Meaning that the next Need for Speed that would come somewhere down the line would stick to the classic formula, not really trying to reinvent itself, at least in this aspect. So that was the plan, a little over half a year after the release of Unbound. However, plans apparently changed. In September 2023, it was announced that Criterion Games is joining EA Entertainment, focusing on the next Battlefield game together with DICE, Ripple Effect, and Ridgeline. However, it's important to note that within that same message, there is a mention that work will also continue on what's next for Need for Speed. Fine, this is pretty clear. Even though they're not mentioning anything specific, that message could actually be understood both ways. This is a point in time when they try to come up with an idea for a next game specifically, or maybe they focus more on finding a direction for the franchise. Next was what I already mentioned, meaning the team still supporting Unbound openly said that they're joining the rest of Criterion in working on Battlefield, and then we jump ahead to February this year when the statement given by EA to Eurogamer basically says that the next game is put on hold and the publisher plans to bring the franchise back in new and interesting ways. Which is basically saying, leave us alone, we have nothing to announce because the studio that was supposed to be working on the next entry in the racing series now has to do supporting work on the new Battlefield game. This is a pretty serious development in the story because it means that now it's going to be the longest break between new games in the franchise since the release of the first game in 1994. And we actually don't know how long that break will be. The sheer fact that we can't expect a new Need for Speed in 2025, 3 years after the release of the previous game, is enough to beat that record. Finally, let's jump to last week because this is where the whole grim perspective on the future of the franchise comes from. First of all, EA announced that they're closing servers to 4 games from their back catalog, which is NHL 21, Madden NFL 22, and FIFA 23. Unfortunately, the list also includes NFS rivals, though it has to be said that this game came out in 2013, so it's not like this is one of the newest entries. Still, shutting down multiplayer in this game means that you won't be able to race with your friends, obviously, but you still will be able to play the game offline. And you'll only be completely pissed off if you want to get all the trophies or achievements in this game, since 2 of them require being online, and after the 7th of October this year, you won't be able to do that any longer. But this in itself means that they're just cutting off games that are maybe not played that much, and they want to cut spendings on online services in these games, right? Well, the context is what matters, and the context is EA is apparently also shutting down Speed Hunters. But wait, what the hell is Speed Hunters? Well, you might not know it because it's not directly related to Need for Speed, but it's a blog that focuses on promoting car culture. If you scroll down, you'll be able to see that the entertainment partner for the blog is Need for Speed actually, and there is a trademark note related to Electronic Arts Incorporated. So even though this was not an NFS themed blog, it was backed by EA in relation to the NFS franchise. Speed Hunters actually launched in 2008 with EA backing the project since day one, and last year, a closer collaboration was announced, apparently to bring new things on top of the content the blog was already creating. The problem is, the latest update on Speed Hunters happened in April this year. There was nothing going on social media either, and just a few days ago, Matthew, one of the photographers in the Speed Hunters crew, posted bad news on Instagram. Speed Hunters is on ice. EA shelved Need for Speed, and that means no more funding for the site. That doesn't sound too good, right? Sure, we can say that this is not solid info coming directly from EA about the future of the franchise. And I agree, we need to treat this with a grain of salt, but if you look at what's been happening with the franchise recently and seeing all the communication post Unbound, keeping in mind that this is a big corporation that has ground rules in how to communicate being a publicly traded company, it doesn't look good. Obviously, no one will just straight up come out and say, you know what, this last game really failed, we see no future in the franchise that's been going on for over 30 years. So all that we can do is just follow the crumbs and try to paint our own picture. And I think EA is definitely trying to pull off a better strategy for themselves. You know what's been going on with the layoffs all over the industry, and you probably know that Dragon Age the Veilguard didn't really perform according to EA's expectations. EA said that the recent Dragon Age had around 1.5 million players by the end of December, and that was only nearly half of what was expected from the game. By the end of January, BioWare was restructured, and it aimed to be, and I quote here, a more agile, focused studio that produces unforgettable RPGs, with the most of the team focusing on the next Mass Effect, while a number of people were moved to other projects within EA, and some of the Veilguard dev team was simply let go, as there were no further plans of developing any content for Veilguard. The new FC is also not really considered a great success. Apparently both FC and Dragon Age actually underperformed, and the announcement of coming short to the expected net bookings in January caused the biggest drop in EA's stock price since 1999. So we have current releases underperforming, we have Need for Speed Unbound that was not only bad in keeping people in, but actually in the UK in the launch week the game sales were 64% down compared to the previous game in the series. And we can't really forget about Battlefield 2042 that also failed to meet the sales expectations, so it makes sense that EA is now completely focused on delivering the next Battlefield game, because if this franchise also tanks, it's going to spell huge trouble for EA. And mind you, there are current reports out there that EA leadership wants the next Battlefield game to achieve 100 million players. That number sounds ridiculous, and in a way it is. 2042 had only about 22 million players, and Battlefield 1, the most successful game in the franchise numbers-wise, has achieved something in a ballpark of 30 million players. Does this mean it's impossible to hit those numbers? Well, it's not possible in Battlefield's current monetization model. It probably would be possible if it was a free-to-play game, like Warzone that hit 100 million players within roughly a year, or Fortnite that reached 200 million registered players as reported in 2018. So I don't know if Battlefield is aiming to suddenly become a free-to-play game, but unless this happens, those internally expected numbers are a pure fiction. Talking about Dragon Age, Battlefield, and FC is actually important in the context of Need for Speed. I think that EA can't really afford to make too many mistakes, seeing how many of their games underperformed recently. They're still far away from being in real trouble. It's not like the company would close within a year if they released another NFS and it flopped. But the issue exists, and the leadership at EA has to make these kinds of decisions to make sure that their CEO can cash another big fat check next year. and then next year. Need for Speed just doesn't seem to be the franchise to bet on at the moment in the company, so that's why it might be put on hold, as it apparently was. It doesn't mean it will never return, but you know how it usually goes. If something is not performing, really good days need to come to be able to again fund something that wasn't a big hit. And seeing the state of the industry right now, with layoffs and projects within big studios being axed, these good days don't seem to be anywhere close. I don't pretend to know the intricacies of the business aspect of running big companies like these, but looking at what Ubisoft is doing, dividing their company into separate entities with the new subsidiary focusing exclusively on Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six as the best performing franchises for the company, well, everyone wants to show growth in order to keep the investors happy, and since only some franchises make good money, they were singled out for this new unit to be able to show a professional-looking spreadsheet with most of the cells colored green. The rest is getting a lower priority treatment, it will probably get less funding, and the worst performance of these games will not influence the good numbers of the biggest franchises, which are usually the most expensive ones. So while EA is not going the similar way, they're just eliminating what's not working, sometimes restructuring studios, meaning getting rid of people, and sometimes changing these studios into supporting studios. Yes, that's what happened with Ghost Games that previously worked on Need for Speed, and then they were rebranded into EA Gothenburg and turned into an engineering support studio for all of EA. Additionally, EA most probably pulled the plug on Codemasters' iconic rally games because in April it was announced that it's the end of the road for Codemasters when it comes to working on WRC, and that the studio is pausing development plans on future rally titles. Racing games don't seem to be in a good place at EA, and all of that in the wake of the accidental news that Forza Horizon 5, recently coming to PS5 for the first time ever, sold 2 million units in just 1 month, a 4-year-old game. So, is EA actually quietly killing off another franchise that they have? This is very much possible, and everything points to the fact that this is exactly what they're doing. It's hard to imagine that Need for Speed might have an actual endpoint, since the series has been in the background of my whole gaming life, while just like with WRC they might simply be putting pause on future Need for Speed titles. Who knows if anyone will even remember to push play sometime in the future. Thank you for watching, take care.